Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. I am Shawnice Hawkins, as Oscar said. I am the new charter school specialist at IDOE. Bea has moved on. She transitioned the middle of September. Sad to see her go, but she is working for one of our authorizers. So I've actually seen her a couple times since then. For any questions, anything, please let me know, anything charter related. I do want to mention that that cohort two for the charter school facilities incentives grant is up on the IDOE website, and I can put a link to that in the chat box in case you want to pass that along, in case you are interested. It is open to any charter school that is not that has not previously been awarded the grant. So if you're part of charter school networking groups, feel free to pass that information or putting these on. It's always really useful, really helpful information, especially for me coming into the charter world and not necessarily having my footing yet when it comes to facilities. So I appreciate that. And like I said, if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Shanice. So today's topic is just a training we have done in the past. It is specific to facility acquisitions. In addition to this presentation, we will be sending out to those that are here, and you can also share this information, two items. Let me share my screen here. Bear with me. One of them will be a one pager. So this entire training will be summarized into a one-page infographic about facility acquisition and how it works. And the second item will be an actual 20-page white paper that will cover this presentation in more depth. So those two items will be available to you. But without that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started. So this training, it is one of our monthly trainings that we do. We switch the topics often, and we encourage anybody that's on this call, if you have a specific need and you think that a broader group would benefit, please let us know so that we can create a training around that. In addition to that, we are conducting facility assessments with a partnership with Amoresco that are being facilitated by the Department of Education. So if you are thinking about expanding your facility or just need general improvements, Amoresco will be conducting those on behalf of IDOE, and there will be no charge for those assessments. Typically, you would need an architect or somebody like Amoresco to do this, and they would have a charge to do the assessment. So this is another service that facilitated by the Department of Education. I highly encourage you or anybody within your network that is looking at a used facility or building new to take advantage of this. So with that is the three topics that we're going to be covering today are evaluating your capital needs, examining your current facility structure, and what your financing options are for those three items. So why is this important? Charter schools are a business. And if you're a business, unlike a public school, you have to be very conscious of how you use your dollars. You don't have the luxury of being able to put a brand new $80 million facility on tax roll the same way your counterparts at the school districts do. So every dollar counts. If your enrollment takes a hit any one year, that puts a tremendous strain on your facility cost. So planning well is incredibly important. So Indiana is actually one of the best charter school states in the country. You guys are able to take advantage of what used to be a $750 grant per pupil, which has recently gone up to $1,200 this year on the budget, and I believe is going to go up again next year. So while that is an advantage of Indiana, it's still not sufficient or at parity with our public school counterparts, as I stated. So you need to be able to put a little bit more into what we're doing. So we're going to cover a few things here in a short video that I'm going to play for you, but we need to understand the difference between the needs and the wants. We need to understand the market research, understanding what your competitors in the school district has, what other charter schools are around, and what the needs are for your students. And then whether or not you can expand to where you want to be, you should have a team of experts internally within your board. What I mean by that is, if you are trying to build a new facility, hopefully there's somebody within your board or their network that can help through that process. Just the different levels of acquisition or that of building can be overwhelming. So having the right skill set is important. Let me play this short video and then we can have some discussion around that.
Reviewing your current financing structure. One of the most asked questions when reviewing financing structure is, how much can I afford? The rule of thumb is 10 to 15% of your total revenues, but each school's model and operating needs are different. In order to determine what you can afford to spend on a new facility, school leaders should look at their cash flow as a metric for evaluating how much extra per month they have available to spend in a facility investment. Let's review some various scenarios where this could play out. School X is evaluating the following options: rent, lease, or purchasing a building. Renting offers a set amount per month that often includes CAM, common area maintenance, and utilities, simplifying the budgeting process. However, these are typically not sustainable long-term because the rental agreements are short-term in nature and flux as the market values of the property change. Leasing, or lease to purchase, provides longer-term security with fixed facility costs. But the downside of leasing is that your monthly payments do not support an investment in your building or balance sheet, and any leasehold improvements to the facility are for the benefit of the owner of the building. In addition, with lease to purchase scenarios, oftentimes the buyout of the facility at the end of the lease term can be bought for market value plus a premium which is paid to the seller. When purchasing or financing a building, there are some common terms to be familiar with. Term versus amortization. These concepts are often confused because in personal and consumer finance, they often mean the same thing. For example, a 30-year home mortgage is repaid over 30 years. In school building financing, the term may be 10 years, which is the length of the agreement, yet the amortization period may be 30 years, which is the number of years the payments are divided, or the repayment schedule. Interest. Interest, which can be fixed or variable over the life of the term, but applied to the amortization as well. Debt service coverage. This literally refers to how many extra dollars you can afford to spend. This is different from your net income after expenses. Debt service is actual cash dollars that you have available to spend per month on your facility payment. Now that we've established these fundamentals, you can begin to take a look at what you can afford. Typically, a longer amortization period will give you the benefit of flexibility to have a lower monthly payment, but it will cost you more interest in the long run to do so. If you are tight on cash or have little reserves, you need to ensure that your monthly payment is as low as possible. If you are in a lofty cash position, you may be able to have more flexibility to service a higher monthly debt payment, which saves you interest and allows you to own the building sooner. At the end of the day, what makes sense for a school varies depending on the unique needs and opportunities presented to them.
All right, we can pause here for a second. We have a very small group with us, and that was a lot of information, and want to take a pause here and allow anybody to ask any questions about what you saw in that video. Anyone? No participation. It's okay. I'll say this. One of the common things that we have experienced in charter schools over the last few years is that most of our, oh, hold on, there's something on the chat. Okay. One of the things that we have experienced is a lot of the schools have entered into lease financing, whether it be through for-profit organizations like Turner Agassiz or not-for-profits like Charter School Development Corporation. What those agreements look like is they'll purchase a building on your behalf, and then they'll charge you a rent that is equal or greater to their actual payment. And they will do that for as long as you're willing to pay them. But that comes with the premium. So when you want to buy the building from them, you usually have to buy it at whatever cost they purchase it for, plus 8%. For not-for-profits, it's usually 5%. For the for-profit groups are usually 10%. So those agreements are okay if you are getting started and are tight on cash, but they can be really tricky and difficult to get out of the longer it takes. Another thing that we have been noticing is a lot of schools enter into bank agreements that were not sustainable. They estimated the projections for enrollment to trend up and up and up, and then if they level off or don't come in as needed, they get into a really tight cash position. We had to do some refinancings for schools like Tinley, Avondale Meadows, and Lighthouse, now Victory Prep, because the payment was incredibly high and it really put a strain on the level of education that we're giving. So at the end of the last video, we discussed how having a longer amortization while you're paying interest a little bit longer makes your payments lower. And it sounds almost like a used car salesman's pitch, but it really is the lesser of two evils, because the interest rate that you can get by these long amortizations is still pretty at par with what a bank will give you. So let me give you an example. Some of those refinancings that we have done extended the school's refinancing by 30 or 35 years. So it made the payments lower, and it maintained a pretty low interest rate. The last one we did was in the 4% range. So you're ultimately making a lower payment at a similar interest rate, but over a longer period of time, which makes your payments lower. And that has been the solution. Now, we have had other schools where they are cash flush because of ESSER, and they've had long-term bonds, and we're helping them defease a portion of those because they're sitting on so much cash that they're able to eliminate part of their debt so that their future debt service is lower. So we're encountering a couple of different scenarios with schools today, thanks to ESSER and being able to have good years that because of tools like PPP, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, that have helped some of the schools be in a much better financial situation. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions about that topic before moving on.
I actually had a question related to that, Oscar. So this new charter facilities incentive grant, I noticed on the allowable activity that debt service is a part of that. And so is that, from your expertise, are you recommending that that's a good use of this in order to pay down some of that?
So that's a loaded question. It depends on what your needs are. So without having enough information, if you are using operational dollars for debt service currently, and you can't use this grant funding, to hire teachers or have pay raises or buy equipment, you can only use it towards facilities. A tool that you could use is you can absolutely use part of that funding for debt service or to bring down your overall debt, and then that will free up your operational dollars for other uses that you see fit. But if you are actually in need of improvements, let's say that you're spending a ton of money because all of your windows are terrible, and in the winter you're going to be spending more money on heating than what it would cost to repair them, or you have a roof that is leaking, then instead of using it for debt service, you should absolutely use it for the intended improvement. So it is difficult to know without more information, but absolutely you have to take care of your immediate needs. But if you need to free up cash, that's a scenario where it would make sense. Did that answer the question, or did I just go in circles?
No, it did. Thank you. And with this CFIG, the allowable activity is on current debt service or only new debt service that would be taken on for an expansion or renovation?
That is based on approval from IDOE, but I believe you can do both, but it is subject to approval, and they'll take it on a situation by situation basis. But I can allow our IDOE expert to answer that question, as they just went through a revamping, and I believe that they were having these type of conversations internally. So Shanice, you want to take that one? Oh, she may not be with us right now. I'll get to that answer for you. I know that IDOE had been discussing the uses, and they will evaluate your proposal. So I've
Oscar,
seen
can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm not on mute, but sorry. So yes, you can use CFIG for rent, to purchase a building, any construction or renovation of an existing school facility, and then some improvements. And then there is, let's see, debt service on the school facility, or, and then like there's some administrative expenses that will be approved. They all go through an approval process, and then for our peer reviewers, and then we will do a budget review also, just to make sure that we're still in compliance with the CFIG regulations.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, and thank you for the answer. So again, getting back to the presentation, how much can I afford? You have to look at your cash flows, and what really truly matters, and whether it's a banking option, capital markets, which would be bonds through the finance authority, or even not-for-profit grants like the Walton Fund, which is FIFIC, or the one, or any other similar not-for-profit lending. They evaluate where you are in your cycle. They typically like to lend to schools that are on their third year of operation, because you can show some trends. And like anything else, if you're showing negative trends, it becomes more difficult, and then the tools are drastically reduced. But there's obviously other things to consider with that, and we'll get into that here momentarily. But I'm going to play another video and then have some discussion around that.
Capital assets and 5-year capital planning. In this video, we will discuss capital planning and the role it plays in charter school finance and operations. First, it's important to understand a few concepts regarding capital planning. The first of which is a capital asset. A capital asset refers to a building, property, or equipment that is utilized by an entity over the course of its useful life. This usual life period is generally over several years, but it can vary. Similarly, capital expenditures refers to any expense that supports capital assets or a capital plan. Oftentimes, a capital asset corresponds with a liability on the balance sheet that was used to finance it. It is seldom the case that a building or equipment will be given freely to a school. Therefore, most facilities will have a private activity bond or a bank loan that was taken out to finance the asset. A needs assessment refers to a school's current capital situation and circumstances. What buildings do they lease or own? What equipment do they use or need to fulfill daily operations? What project or maintenance must be completed within the upcoming year? All of these questions are an important component of a capital plan. It is imperative that the board of directors and school leadership take stock of their capital plan before embarking on a comprehensive capital budgeting process. It is important for management to set a capital needs list for immediate capital infrastructure priorities that must be met within the upcoming year. For example, an HVAC system that needs replacing or a new bus to accommodate more students. There are certain capital needs that must be met and must have the funds set aside to do so. Similarly, school leaders should form a wish list for capital wants. This additional list would be beneficial for items that the school would like to implement at some point, but considers such items as more of a desired list if funds permit. For example, a new playground or a college readiness center. The differentiating factor between a capital needs and a capital wants list is the ability to pay for it. Funding must be identified to successfully address capital needs. A capital plan is typically determined on a forward-looking 5-year basis with annual revisions. Unforeseen capital expenditures can wreak havoc on a school if their leadership is not anticipating it in the annual budget. A leak in a ceiling roof or an unexpected technological expense could require urgent monetary resources that can adversely affect a school budget if not planned for in the capital plan. Planning and saving for capital expenditures is non-negotiable. Capital planning can be overwhelming, but it is necessary to achieve a balanced and responsible budget for schools. If you are unsure how to begin this process or unaware of what expenses your faculty might be likely to need, speak to an advisory professional soon.
Okay. Any questions on that video? It's pretty straightforward. You know, you can only afford the improvements that you have funding for or planning to set money aside. And usually if you are at capacity in your facility, it is pretty difficult to set new dollars aside when you are already using most of it for operations. If you're still growing, then you can determine new revenue coming in from students to go into some of those, whether it be improvements, new buses, or even a new facility. Any questions on the capital wants versus capital needs and the process, the 5-year process? Anything I can answer regarding that video? Okay, moving on to how to pay for things. If you're a brand new school that just got chartered by any of the authorizers, whether it be the Mayor's Shrine, Ball State, it doesn't matter which one. If you're brand new and are not part of a CMO or have foundational backing, your options are pretty limited. Most people end up renting a space or doing a lease to purchase. I briefly talked about lease to purchase as the CSDC or Turner Agassi model, and there are other groups like them that will purchase the building for you and ultimately pass through their payment with a premium. There are some CDFI loans out there. So IFF will do some small ones. I think they'll go up to like $1.5 million. They might be a little bit higher now. And LISC is another one. So those are out there, but usually are not enough to really get you the space that you need, even for a startup. Another tool that is used more frequently in the South, Texas, Arizona, California, is EB-5 loans. What EB-5 is if you have a wealthy investor from a foreign country that wants to invest in your school as a bank, so they'll be acting like the bank. If they invest at least 750,000, I believe that amount might have gone up recently. If they keep their investment with your school for up to 7 years, they become residents. So this is something that a lot of foreign wealthy individuals will use because it's easier to go through the EB-5 loan where they're making an investment in something, sometimes school, sometimes housing, and they're able to send their kids through college. Again, this is not something that we've seen a lot in Indiana. The last EB-5 project that I'm aware of was in Indianapolis, Market 360, which is a pretty large building, apartment complex in downtown Indianapolis. That was primarily funded with EB-5 funding. But again, that is one that this group probably was not aware of, but it is not has not been used for schools in the state yet. And then the last one is your traditional bank financing. And traditional bank financing, they'll treat you like any other commercial client. They're going to look at your loan to value, meaning that if you're trying to build $1 million school, and I'm only using that number, I know it's very low and you can't build a school for $1 million, but for argument purposes, if you have $1 million building, they'll want you to have $300,000 cash and they'll lend you 70% of the loan. So that becomes really difficult for schools to come up with that 20 to 30% loan to value requirement that banks have. The second thing about banks that becomes difficult is they often come with a balloon payment. What that means is that they're going to make you refinance every 3 to 4 years, and you're really subject to market values, meaning that right now interest rates are really low. So if you're coming up with a balloon payment, you're probably going to do better off than you did a few years back. But it could be the opposite, where the bank's hedging their bet by going into that 3 to 5 year reset every so often, and you're really forced to refinance. So it is a tool that you for a startup you have to have, but it is difficult to get to bet on the future. And Katie, not a problem. Thank you for being with us. We'll send you the additional information, and we're happy to follow up with any additional questions. So the next step is, what if you have been around for at least 3 years? At this point, you start having a lot more options, and it depends on your enrollment trends. So if you're showing positive enrollment trends, you're able to access the tax-exempt bond financing market that usually is only afforded to traditional schools, so normal districts, cities, towns, and states. The way that works is schools go through the Indiana Finance Authority, and they issue tax-exempt bonds, which make it attractive to investors to invest. So because of the tax exemption, that savings gets passed on to the school, and you're able to get better rates. And then the last one is you'll start getting the attention of people like the Equitable Facilities Fund and the Facilities Investment Fund, which are the best product out there to schools, but it is highly competitive and really difficult to get. But if you're able to get one of those products, by far it is the best thing you can get, because they're ultimately tax-exempt bonds that a large foundation is taking on your behalf, and the interest rate will be incredibly low, and they're just passing on the savings to you. So again, if you are a rock star school that is A-rated, serves the right demographics, you should truly look into that, even for refinance or expansion. Now, if you do have a negative enrollment trends, but you have been around for 3 to 5 years, you have all the same options that a new school obviously has, which are not great, but you also still have access to the tax-exempt bond market. And you do what is called a private placement. Instead of sending it to a multitude of investors, we negotiate with one investor, and there's a lot of social funds out there that will hedge their bet with schools that are in this situation. If you have a good plan so if you see negative enrollment trends, or you've had something affect you like COVID, where you lost a lot of students because of mask mandates, or there was anything that really, or any issues that were controversial in nature, and you saw a negative trend, there are tools for you. They're not as advantageous as a true capital markets solution. These are usually in the 6% range, which are not great, but are out there to be able to finance over 35 years at 6%. We don't like to do those, but there's a lot of schools that need that in order to survive by lowering their payments.
Oscar, a question for you really quickly. Is there a time limit on the negative positive enrollment trends? So is it like in the last 3 years, in the last year? What does that look like?
So they'll look at your most recent data, and everything's a story. No matter whether we're going to a bank, to EFF, or even to a single investor, it's how we tell the story and what we're doing about that story. So they look at it holistically, but they're mostly interested in what has happened recently. So a big red flag would be if you all of a sudden lost half of your enrollment due to a school policy or something that happened. There's a school who took a position on transgender bathrooms, and it cost them some of their enrollment. And as long as you explain what happened and what you're doing to address the loss and to recruit new parents, it's usually sufficient. You just have to be able to explain why it happened. Now, if it's due to poor performance, if you are deteriorating in the level of education that you're giving, and you're losing students because of the low quality, that's a tougher thing to get over, and sometimes makes it a lot more difficult, and you really have to have a solid plan to sell. Did that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Not a problem. Now, the easiest thing to do when financing an expansion school is if you're part of a CMO or you're a network. So meaning that this might be your second school that you're building or your third school that you're building, and you're leveraging your current network. You can do everything, even though you're starting a brand new school with no enrollment, you're able to leverage the success of previous schools. And all of the previous options that we covered here under the positive enrollment trends are available to you. And pretty much the sky's the limit. You have a lot of options. But if you're a part of a successful network and want to build a new school, but your board is unwilling to use the credit or cross leverage the entire network for the new school, then you really are just a new startup. The fact that your name let's say that you are a brand name, let's say that, I don't know, Boys and Girls Club had a charter school, and even though you had a strong brand like Boys and Girls Club and you were starting a brand new school, if you did not have the support of the current network financially, you still would be seen as a brand new school and you wouldn't have any advantages to that. And this will be the last video that I play, and it's really around what available tools do you have that are outside of the school that are based on your community and politics, and that is credit enhancement. And I'll let this video explain it, and then I'll answer some questions around it.
credit enhancement. Unlike charter schools, public schools have the ability to support and fund their capital costs, such as facilities, by relying on income from local property taxes. While charter schools may not be able to rely on additional income from local property values directly, they can benefit by requesting credit enhancement support from their local taxing unit that does have the ability to levy taxes. Taxing units can include municipalities, school districts, and states. An alternative to placing the cost of the school facility on the taxpayer is to utilize the credit enhancement options available to a charter school. This scenario can be equated to if a parent decides to co-sign for a car. They lend their established credit and reliable payment history to the less established younger person, even though the younger person usually intends to pay it back themselves. Credit enhancement programs exist in many states in the U.S. today: Colorado, Utah, Texas, and others. All employ credit enhancement strategies. In addition to state-supported credit enhancement programs, there are large CMOs and foundations that use their balance sheets to credit enhance the charter schools they support. But what if your charter school can't access this foundational enhancement, or is established in a state that doesn't support credit enhancement programs? If this is the case, the charter school can ask their local governing taxing body for assistance on their behalf. Here are the pros and cons to doing so. Pros: the charter school benefits from a substantially lower interest rate, which leads to savings for the classroom and school operations. Unlike district schools, property taxes are not the primary source of repayment, rather a backup or secondary source. Charter schools must still show the ability to repay the debt. The credit enhancement helps create strong, successful educational institutions and build an asset and investment in the community. Requires elected officials to make a determination, which is sometimes even. If the charter school were to fail while secured by the real estate, the taxing unit would have to make annual payments on their behalf until the asset is liquidated or another school takes the place of the failed school. The decision to access credit enhancement will ultimately depend on the relationship between a charter school and their local taxing unit.
Okay, so let me just give some clarifying facts around credit enhancement. And in Indiana, we do not have a moral obligation for charter schools. Many other states do, and they allow the schools to be able to borrow money with the guarantee of the state behind them. So the options to Indiana schools are as follows. A local school district is able to levy taxes on their behalf if they are an innovation school. Innovation schools, as I understand it right now, are available to anybody in the state, but the only innovation partnerships that I have seen are within IPS. So if you cannot get support for credit enhancement through your local school district, your options are your city or town, your county, or the state itself. That process is similar to what happens with TIF. You have a lot of developers that go to a city and say, hey, I need to build X, Y, or Z, but the bank will not give me all the funding. Will you give me what is called a special benefits tax? And cities and towns will do this for housing projects. They'll do it for mixed use projects, retail, new businesses. So I always ask the question, why not invest in education, which is the foundation of economic development? So if the school district that you're a part of, you're not able to become an innovation school, then is the town or the county willing to put their credit enhancement behind you? And it's not asking them to make payments on your behalf, but rather, will you make payments if we absolutely collapse and that's a risk that they have to take, and oftentimes it's not as welcome. But I'll pause there. Any questions regarding that? All right. Well, there was very little interaction, which is okay. And that was the last of my slides for this presentation. But I'd like to share something else with you here briefly to just kind of summarize the presentation, and then I'll let you all go on with your day. Just bear with me, allow me to stop presenting here. Before I let you go, I just want to recap our training today. The first step you always have to do is to evaluate your capital needs, figure out what the needs assessment is, what your true needs are. And this will be important when applying for this grant. You should have something identified and a way to pay it, and why you have the need of the grant to pay for it. And then you want to look at, if you're trying to use it towards debt or debt service, what is your current structure? Are you leasing? Do you own? Do you co-locate? Do you rent, etc.? And how that's going to impact that. And then, how am I financing right now? Am I leasing? Am I renting? Am I paying a bank? The next step that you'll take is, depending on where you are in your school life cycle, 1 to 4 years, you're still considered school. Usually I say 4 here, but they'll call a 3-year-old school an established school. And then you start looking at what your enrollment trends are, and then that will give you certain options. And if you're replication and expansion, you're still a new school, and it depends on your support. Below here, we'll list out the level of financing tools that you have. Again, for new schools, were as follows. Then you had for established schools and for replication. This one pager will be sent out to those of you that are on this call, as well as the white paper. And if there are no additional questions, we can end the training for the day. Shanice, unless you have anything else, other remarks that you would like to make.
I didn't have anything else. I had I did put the link to the charter schools program page where the CFIG grant application is for cohort 2. I put that in the chat. If you have any questions, let me know. Oscar, thanks for this. This was super informative. And then, as Oscar mentioned, we will have the white paper and also the recorded presentation on the Bondry website.
All right. Well, thank you all, and I'll let you have 15 minutes back of your day. Thank you for joining us, and please reach out if you have somebody that would like a school evaluation, and we'll coordinate that with Amoresco. Take care.
Thanks, Oscar.